among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of
Mother of
God,
God, pray for us sinners,
now
now
and
and at the hour of our death.
Amen.
Amen. So, good evening, dear friends, and a warm welcome once again. Today, the topic for our formation program is theological imagination. And to talk about this topic, we have an eminent person amidst us, Father Sebastian Valpalli. Excuse me, Father, if I have mispronounced your name.
Absolutely no problem.
With love, we call him Father Sabi, a man with a good sense of humor, a man of depth, a very simple person. Father Sabi is a Jesuit of Gujarat Jesuit province, and he's a faculty member at present in JD, and he resides in Papal Seminary. Before he could come here, he was in teaching faculty for over 20 years in Gujarat Jesuit Theologate and Gujarat Seminary. At present, he is HOD of the Indian Studies Department in Nanadeepa. He teaches courses in subaltern theology and socio-cultural analysis for the theology faculty, apart from courses in contemporary philosophy for the philosophy students. So we welcome you, Father Sabi, and over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Father Linus, for your kind words of introduction. So we shall begin, and I will do it by presenting my PowerPoint. Okay, I hope you can see my PowerPoint presentation.
Yes.
And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It's a great privilege and pleasure to share a few thoughts with this lay theology program. So let's begin. So today's topic is theological imagination. As we go ahead, it'll become clear to you, I guess. Okay. So today's session is planned in this following way. There are three sections basically. The first section deals with how Christian theology developed, a very brief introductory thing. And second, some descriptions of theology. I will deal with four ways theologians describe theology. And the last section is theologizing meaningfully in today's world. Then conclusion and some questions for reflection. Okay. Now, first section, we focus on how Christian theology developed historically. So one of the ways to understand theology is by looking at how it originally developed. So let's begin by looking at the very term theology. The term theology passed first from Greek language to Latin. And then later, this term theology began to be used in modern languages like English. It was the ancient Greeks who used the word theologia, theology, for the first time. They used it some 700 years before Jesus Christ. Please note that. So originally, it is not a Christian term, it's a Greek term. But it did not mean the same thing as Christian theology when ancient Greece, when they used it, it did not mean the same as we use it today. Who were the theologians in ancient Greece? In Greek antiquity, theologians were poets like Homer. Homer wrote epic poems like Iliad and Odyssey. Homer lived in the 8th century before Christ. Hesiod was another such poet and theologian. These Greek theologians speculated about the origins of the world and of gods. So what did they do? So they speculated, they thought about how the world came into existence. They talked about Greek gods. Most of what they thought was in the form of poems and mythology, myths. For the Greeks, any poet who speculated about the origins of the world and of the gods was a theologian. So that's how they understood the word theology and theologian. There were many gods in ancient Greece. Most of these gods like Zeus, Hera, Hercules, Apollo, and Hermes resided in Mount Olympus. Mount Olympus was a mythical abode of the gods. Hindus have Kailas, Kailas, where Hindu gods reside. Similarly, in Greek antiquity, Olympus was the place where they lived. Apart from theologians, there were also famous philosophers, another category, such as Socrates, Plato, Aristotle in ancient Greece. Unlike theologians, philosophers used reason and logic to reflect about the world and human society. Theologians used mythology, poems, etc., whereas philosophers used reason, logic to think about the world and society. Philosopher Plato was the first to use the term theology in his work, Republic. So that's the place where we come across the word for the first time, okay, in Republic, in the work of philosopher Plato. In Greek antiquity, the word theologia meant systematic treatment of the divine and of gods. So it's a systematic way of talking about the divine. So the basic idea of theology was the systematic treatment of the divine. It was this idea which the Christians borrowed from ancient Greeks. So this is how that idea gets into Christian thinking. So Christians would borrow this idea from ancient Greeks. And what is that idea? Theology is the systematic treatment of the divine. Now, we can ask a question, how did Christian theology develop? So the earliest layer of theology is found in the New Testament. It was the result of the reflection process of the primitive Christian communities. This process of reflection produced the New Testament writing. So they started reflecting about the Christ event. Okay, that's how New Testament is produced. So the main New Testament authors are Paul, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. What are these authors reflecting upon? The New Testament writers reflected on the meaning of the Christ event. Here, Christ event means basically the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. This process may have lasted for about 40 to 50 years or so. We don't know exactly, but more or less 40 to 50 years. That means between AD 50 to 90. Now, I'm talking only about the process of writing the New Testament, okay? New Testament letters and gospels, etc. Before that, they were reflecting about Jesus Christ after the death of Jesus from, let's say, AD 80 to AD 50. They were definitely thinking about Jesus, praying, and reflecting about Jesus in the Christian communities. So between AD 30 and AD 50, as I mentioned, many sayings of Jesus was in circulation within Christian communities. So now they will talk about what Jesus did, what Jesus said, once Jesus, apostles would share with the Christian community, Jesus taught us to pray, or, he said this one, and, he did this, healing. These stories were circulating in the Christian community after the death of Jesus. So that's why I said between AD 30 and AD 50, meaning the sayings of Jesus is circulating. Also, many incidents such as healing, teaching, miracles, and passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus were in circulation in Christian communities during this period. So the New Testament books contain the earliest layers of Christian theology. So how we are trying to understand how Christian theology developed. So the earliest layers of Christian theology you will find in the New Testament writings. These texts bear witness to the events which gave rise to Christian faith. What are these events? These key events are the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, or Christ event, we say in theology, Christ event. They're reflecting on Christ event. The New Testament writers interpreted the Christ event mainly from Jewish background. They were looking at Christ event from Jewish background, most of them, but not everybody, but most of them. So these texts see Jesus Christ as the Messiah and the fulfillment of the old prophecies coming from the Old Testament. So Jesus is the fulfillment of the messianic prophecies. They were expecting a Messiah, the Jewish people. So Jesus is the fulfillment of that prophecies. So basically, New Testament is looking at Jesus from this perspective. So how did Christian theology develop? We are trying to focus on this question. So the first texts of the New Testament were written by St. Paul. And most of these are in the epistolary or letter form. He wrote letters. The earliest of these letters by Paul may have been composed in and around AD 50 to 55. We don't know exactly when he wrote, but most biblical scholars would say that perhaps the first document of the New Testament is the First Thessalonians, written more or less, between 50 and 55. We don't know exactly when it is written, but more or less between AD 50 and 55. And the first document, according to biblical scholars, the first document in the New Testament is First Thessalonians. So the letters of Paul, another important thing, they were in circulation in different Christian communities. Paul was held in high esteem. So what he wrote was circulated in Christian communities. Later, all these texts would be collected together and it will be formed in a part of the New Testament canon. So eventually these texts became the New Testament. Not only letters of Paul, several other letters, Peter's letters and Philemon, and importantly, or the Gospels. So New Testament texts were seen as the norm for Christian faith and for Christian living. It's a norm. So what is Christian faith? How Christians should live? So they will look towards the New Testament. So we have the guidance for Christian, what is Christian faith and Christian living in the New Testament. So that becomes the norm, the yardstick to judge Christian faith and Christian living. That's very, very important. That's the importance of the New Testament, So this New Testament period may be seen as the very first stage of the development of Christian theology. So this is how Christian theology developed in a very, very simplistic way of putting it. This is how more or less Christian theology, the earliest layer of Christian theology developed in this way, and that is through the New Testament. The next stage, next important stage, so we saw the Christian theology developed in the New Testament. The next stage is, the second stage is, the development of theology is known as the patristic period, or fathers of the church. Patristic period means fathers of the church. Pater in Latin means father, patristic father. This fathers of the church are Christian leaders who are held in high esteem in Christian society. Okay, they were leaders, Christian leaders. They wrote huge amount of things, more or less from 2nd century towards the 6th and 7th century. There are a lot of Christian leaders, mainly bishops, theologians. These are known as the fathers of the church. There are Latin fathers, there are Greek fathers, there are Syriac fathers. We don't get into all the details, but fathers of the church, they wrote plenty. So this is the second stage after the New Testament period in the development of Christian theology. So these fathers were prominent Christian leaders. They are known as the fathers of the church. From the 2nd century onwards, these fathers began to expand. The process of reflection began by the New Testament writers. So they will start expanding the process of reflection. Please note that there's an expansion of the process of reflection about Christian faith, theology. That's how theology develops. So these fathers wrote on a variety of topics pertaining to Christian faith and morality. Two important areas, many areas are there, but two important areas: Christian faith, that's the first area. Second one is morality, how Christians should live, etc., behave. Some of the earliest church fathers are Saint Clement of Rome, AD 30 to 100, Ignatius of Antioch, AD 35 to 107, Saint Polycarp, AD 69 to 155. These three fathers are apostolic fathers. These three earliest fathers are known as apostolic fathers. Why are they called apostolic fathers? Because they had seen the apostles. They had been with the apostles. Some of them may have been the disciples of these apostles. So these three are known as apostolic fathers. All three became martyrs, and they wrote some letters, Ignatius of Antioch, Clement of Rome, they wrote letters. These letters are there, and they are read in the early Christian communities, etc. All of them became martyrs. They were killed. So please note one thing, that during this period, Christianity is mainly developing in the Roman Empire. Okay, I didn't get time to put the map of Roman Empire. Christianity is developing in the Roman Empire. Okay, most of the development is around this empire, which has two parts. There's a western part of the Roman Empire with Rome as the center, and there's an eastern part of the Roman Empire with Constantinople as the capital. Okay, so these are two parts of the Roman Empire, and Christianity is developing here. And according to tradition, there is also Christianity developing in India, a place called Kerala. Okay, according to tradition, St. Thomas came, etc. But we don't have any definite information about any theology developing over there. Okay, most of this theology is developing at this stage in the Roman Empire, in the East as well as in the West. Okay. So this is the first patristic period, the early fathers. Then there are it will develop further. There are apologetic fathers. Then you have many fathers out there. Okay, like Augustine and many of them. All of them helped the theology to develop, to grow. They reflected. They wrote plenty. Okay, so this fathers of the church is another important stage in the development of Christian theology. So after the time of the fathers, Christian theology went through various stages of development, like medieval period, medieval theology, then scholasticism, Renaissance theology during that period, Reformation, Protestantism would come, and there is the anti-Reformation. Jesuits were important during that period, and modern age, more or less starting from 18th, 19th century, theology develops. So all these stages, through the stages, theology develops. So various events and thinkers of these different stages shaped Christian theology. Please remember, all these stages we are mentioning is European history. Okay. In the next section, we focus on some of the descriptions of theology given by some famous Christian theologians. So with this, we finish part one, how Christian theology developed. And we saw two important stages. Okay, we don't have to go into all through stages. We don't have time for all that kind of thing. So we saw how Christian theology developed. How first in the Greek antiquity, the term theology, how it was used, then how theology developed during New Testament period, then how theology developed during patristic period. We just briefly saw these things. Now we move to the next section. Next section involves some of the descriptions of theology given by some famous theologians. The second section we move to. So some descriptions of theology. So we can ask, what is theology, or what is the nature of theology? what are the nature of theology? Or what do we do when we do theology? What are the nature of theology? What are the scope of theology? In other words, while studying theology, what are we doing? To answer these questions, we shall see what some of the famous theologians say about theology. So that's what we are going to do in this section. Descriptions about theology by some famous theologians. So first, we shall take the classical definition of theology given by Saint Anselm. Then we shall focus on Karl Rahner, another famous theologian of the 20th century, how he describes theology. Thirdly, we shall focus on the description of theology given by another Jesuit theologian, famous philosopher and theologian, Bernard Lonergan. And lastly, fourthly, we shall see some of the radical changes Pope Francis brings into Catholic theology. Very briefly, we'll mention these things, okay? So we get an idea, what do they mean by theology? So all different descriptions, but there are some common themes that is running through. There are some changes brought about some of the theologians, etc. Okay, as we go ahead, it will become clear to you. So first, theology as faith-seeking understanding. This is a famous description given by Anselm of Canterbury. So he was in the more or less in the 12th century, 11th and 12th century, a medieval theologian. So how does he describe theology? Anselm, theology is faith-seeking understanding. Just 3 words, but it's a beautiful description. It's a very profound description. So we shall see that. So Saint Anselm was a medieval theologian. He was a Benedictine monk. So he's he belonged to the Benedictine order, okay, a religious order. Later, Anselm became the Archbishop of Canterbury, that is England. Anselm contributed significantly to the growth of theology during the medieval period. So Anselm described theology as faith-seeking understanding. So how does he describe? Faith-seeking understanding. Very easy to remember, very easy to remember, just 3 words. So how does he describe theology? Theology is faith-seeking understanding. So this definition gives very useful insight into the nature of theology. So what is theology? It is faith-seeking understanding. So what are some of the implications of Anselm's definition of theology? So I must, give a warning in the coming slides, 3 slides. What we are going to see, they are not said by Anselm at all. It is the implications that's implied in Anselm's description of theology, faith-seeking understanding. So what we are going to see is not said by Anselm, but we are trying to see the implications of this description by Anselm. Okay, so we take 3 words separately. First, theology is faith-seeking understanding. So we take the first element, that is faith. So first of all, theology is faith-seeking understanding. So what is the implication of this? What does it mean? So it can mean that theology is essentially a faith activity. It's a faith activity. In other words, faith is the starting point of theology. Okay? Faith is the starting point of theology. You see how it is different from, let's say, sociology, anthropology, history, social sciences. See, social sciences, you can't bring your faith. You can't bring. The sociologist has to bracket his faith. He cannot afford to bring his faith into sociological inquiry because that will interfere his interpretation of social realities. Your faith is a kind of private thing, okay? It's a personal thing. That's the understanding. So historians and sociologists and anthropologists, economists, they will not bring their religious faith into their subject. Theology is different. Theology, the very starting point is the faith, is essentially a faith activity. There is a big difference between theology and sociology, or theology and philosophy. Okay, faith is the starting point, is essentially a faith activity. Please note that this is very, very important. You cannot bracket your faith while doing theology, so to say. So another important implication here is that theology tries to express the faith of the community, faith of the community, faith of the community. So thus theology has an ecclesiastical dimension, very, very important. I would like to stop for a moment to explain a very important aspect of Catholic theology. Please remember that Catholic theology is somewhat different from Protestant theology. How it is different, I will explain to you. Some small digression here. Now, for Protestants, there are three important things they would say is sola scriptura, sola fide, sola gratia. That means it's only through faith, it is through scripture that we are saved. It is through grace we are saved. It is through sola fide, gratia, and through scripture. These three things are the only important things for Protestants. We Catholics would say that these three things are important for Catholics also. But Catholic Church would add one more dimension to Catholic theology, that is tradition. Tradition. For Catholics, tradition is important because hierarchy, the Pope, the priest, and the old structures. For Protestants, that is not important. Okay, so this is a very important distinction between Catholic theology and Protestant theology. Catholics would say that all these three things are important. What the Protestants say, we accept it fully. The scripture, faith, and grace, they are very important for salvation. But the Catholics, church is also important. The tradition is important. That's why I put it here. Theology has an ecclesiastical dimension, church dimension, because there's a teaching authority is involved. Okay, teaching authority. Okay, I want you to note this important aspect. Now, secondly, theology is faith seeking understanding. The second element is seeking. So what does it mean? So seeking implies searching, inquiry, trying to find out. Okay, so this seeking may be seeking for God, seeking the meaning of faith, seeking meaning of life, seeking the meaning of values. It can involve many, many things. Theology can seek many of these things. It involves search, inquiry. So this seeking implies a process and asking questions. Theology involves asking questions. See, theology is not just repeating what the Pope said or the fathers of the church said. No, it's not that. There's always process of asking questions. That's how theology develops. Okay. Moreover, the dimension of seeking implies the provisional nature of theology. Theology has a provisional nature. It is not a permanent achievement. Theology is not a permanent achievement. It can change. It can change. It evolves. So seeking faith, seeking understanding. Third element, faith seeking understanding. The third element is understanding. What does it mean? Theology makes use of intelligence and reason for understanding. Okay. So theology involves systematic inquiry. Only then we can have understanding. Okay. It's a faith, Christian faith, seeking understanding. So this understanding involves systematic inquiry. This inquiry can be many things about Jesus, about the Bible, about traditions, about morality, so many things. So a sound theology is located at the crossroad, cross-section of faith and reason. Okay, both faith and reason are important. In the 19th century, there was a kind of heresy which is known as deism. Deism means, there are certain Christians who said that only faith matters. Reason is not important, they said. That's why I call it deism. Catholic Church disagreed with that deism. Catholic Church hold the view that both faith and reason are important. Both faith and reason are important. The previous Pope, Benedict, the other Pope, wrote an encyclical, John Paul II, Fides et Ratio. Faith and reason, both are important. He said that it is like the two wings. Both faith and reason are required. So Christian theology, a sound theology, a good theology is a balance between faith and reason. What does it mean? It means that you cannot see faith and reason involve two polarities, two poles. You cannot go to only to one pole and say that only faith is important. Then we lose the balance. In a similar way, we cannot go to the other extreme, that is reason, and say only reason is important in theology. Then we lose the balance. We require both faith and reason. So now we come to the second description of theology by famous Jesuit theologian Karl Rahner. So he described theology as faith reflection. Okay, faith reflection. So what does he mean by this? So Karl Rahner is one of the famous Jesuit theologians of the 20th century. He has huge number of works to his credit, huge number of things he has written. He taught theology for many years, and many years he taught in Innsbruck University, where many of the Jesuits and others have studied. Okay, Father Paul Raj and many others, Father Richard and Father V.M. Jones, all these people teaching here, they studied there. So he taught theology in Innsbruck. Karl Rahner was an expert at the Second Vatican Council. So the Second Vatican Council, I hope you must have heard about Second Vatican Council. In late 1960s, mid-1960s, they had this famous Vatican Council called by John 23rd. It brought huge changes into Catholic theology and thinking. And when this council was convened, they had many experts to help cardinals and bishops in drafting all the documents. So Karl Rahner was one of the experts it's called peritus in Latin, peritus, expert in the Second Vatican Council. So Rahner described theology as reflection on Christian faith. It sounds very simple, but he's a very profound theologian. So for him, what is theology? Theology is reflection on Christian faith. So what does he mean by this? It sounds very simple. Let's see what he meant by this. According to Rahner, Christian faith has two levels. Okay, Christian faith has two levels. What are these two levels? So the first level is the very experience of faith. The first level, the experience of faith. This experience of faith is usually mediated by the Christian community, Christian tradition. The experience of faith, we all know that, no? For most of us, our first, faith, it was handed over by our parents, mothers especially mothers. My mother used to tell me stories from the Old Testament. Okay, then I used to listen to all these stories. Okay, so this experience of faith is usually mediated by Christian community. For example, the apostles had the faith experience in the first century. So here is an example, okay? Apostles had faith experience because apostles moved around with Jesus. They saw what Jesus said and did. They took part in his mission. So that's a kind of faith experience of the apostles. Jesus Christ was central to this faith experience of the apostles. So Jesus Christ was central to this faith experience. So now we come to the second level. So this basic faith experience, which is the first level, it was reflected upon and then articulated few years later through the New Testament. So the second level is the articulation of the reflection and articulation on their faith experience. That is the New Testament. When they articulate it, when they write it down, that's articulation. They reflected on their faith experience. They wrote it down. That means the articulation. That's the New Testament. So that's the second level. That articulation is the second level. So this is the second level of faith. This level is the reflection on our faith experience or the community's experience of faith. So this faith experience needs to be understood in a broad sense. Okay, in a broad sense, it has to be understood. So theology emerges when we reflect on our Christian experience or faith experience. When we reflect on our experience of faith experience, Christian experience, and articulate it, then theology emerges. Only when we articulate it becomes theology. Please note that experience in itself is not theology. Faith experience is important, but at that level, first level, it is not yet theology. Only when you reflect upon your experience, only when you articulate it, reflect and articulate, only then it becomes theology. So, for example, we ask questions such as, what does my Christian faith tell us about this particular experience? What does Christian faith mean in this given situation? These are different questions about our Christian faith, and reflect. It helps us to reflect when we ask questions like this. What does my Christian faith tells me about this particular experience? Or what does Christian faith mean in this particular situation? Okay, that's how we reflect. Then it becomes theology. So when we talk about theology, it is basically an articulation and interpretation of faith. Please remember this is an articulation and interpretation of faith. This interpretation and articulation will not be always accurate or perfect. Rana would say that. Because there's an interpretation. Okay? This is because there remains always a gap between our experience and the articulation of that experience. A simple example would be, let's say I had a very intense experience, very deep experience I had, and I want to share it with my friend. So I share it with my friend. But when I share that experience to my friend, I don't think I can capture every aspect of my experience, that intense experience. That's the meaning here. There'll be always a gap between our experience and the articulation of that experience. Okay? These are common experiences. We try to share with somebody our experience. There'll be always a gap between my experience and articulation of that experience. Something similar is true about theology. Okay? It's an interpretation, it's an articulation. It will not be always accurate or perfect. It always will have limitations. Then we come to the third description of theology by Bernard Lonergan. Theology as cultural mediation. Okay, what does it mean? So Lonergan was a Canadian Jesuit and taught at the Gregorian University, Rome. Like Rana, Lonergan also was an expert, a peritus at the Second Vatican Council. He has written many books on theology and philosophy. One of his famous books is Method in Theology. Method in Theology. So this is that book, Method in Theology. In Method in Theology, Lonergan described the role of theology as cultural mediation. Okay, I'm not giving the whole sentence because it's very complicated. So let's simplify the whole thing because it's not needed. Or, it's a technical and things like that. So we don't go into that. So what is theology for Lonergan? In simple terms, theology negotiates the meaning of Christianity in a particular culture. Okay. So what does theology do? Theology negotiates the meaning of Christianity in a particular culture. Okay, that's what theology does. Excuse me, the phone is ringing. So what does it mean? So what he's saying is, what does Christianity mean in a particular culture? Theology helps to understand that. Okay, in a particular culture, what does theology mean? So you have, 16th and 17th century of very many Jesuits in India and China, making inculturation in China. Matteo Ricci, Verbiest, Adam Scholl, and here in India, in Tamil Nadu, Di Nobili, several Jesuits. Imagine in the 17th century, they were adopting this Western theology. They are trying to interpret Christianity through categories which is understood by people. Okay, so that's the meaning here. Theology has to make sense in a particular culture, otherwise it's useless. That's what Bernard Lonergan is saying. So theology negotiates the meaning of Christianity in a particular culture. It means, what does the message of Jesus and Christianity mean in a particular culture? Now, that's an enormous task, actually. How do we translate the meaning of Christianity in a particular culture? So theology helps in translating that meaning. So in simple terms, that's the meaning what Bernard Lonergan is saying. What does theology do in a for us? Okay. Now, the last one, I'm not going to describe Pope Francis's idea of theology, but he has brought a very important change in Catholic theology. He is so much loved by people. You see, the child is going to him. He wants to the child is a beautiful picture. When I saw it, I liked it very much, and I just want to share one little incident which I read a few months back. It was written by a Catholic bishop in Kerala. He was traveling in a train, and he was with all this, in his cassock or something like that. So in the train, there was a lady opposite to him. So this lady asked him, will you be going to Rome? So the bishop said, yeah, after a few months, I'll be going to Rome. And she said, you see, I'm a Hindu. Please tell Pope Francis that we Hindus love Pope Francis more than Christians, Catholics. She's told that. And when this bishop went to Rome, he told Pope that. Yeah, Pope was very happy, Yeah, very nice. If you meet her, give my regards to her. But Bishop is not going to meet her because it was a chance meeting in a train. So he's immensely popular, Pope Francis, and he brings a lot of changes into theology. I'll just briefly mention that. So Pope Francis is acknowledged as one of the important world leaders. He's very much loved by many people. He brought some fresh thinking into Catholic theology. For him, the church is the church of the poor. Pope Francis emphasized the pastoral character of theology. Pastoral character. Theology should be always at the service of the people. The church should be at the service of the people. In the next slide, I will show you in a graphic form the important change that is brought about by Pope Francis. Very easy to understand, very, very easy to understand. See here, the radical theology of Pope Francis. The radical theology of Pope Francis. How does Pope Francis bring about changes in today's theology, in today's church? The first part is traditional theology. How traditional theology was done. At the center of traditional theology is doctrines. Okay, from doctrines, they developed a liturgy, politics, actions, relationships, service, justice, love, morality. Everything is centered around the doctrine, Christian doctrines. Doctrine was important, the most important thing. Believing the right thing. That was important. That is at the center. Okay. So the belief was very, very important in Catholic theology. It was a doctrine-centered approach to theology. Morality came from, a lot of doctrine, liturgy, liturgical doctrines, politics, also doctrines, justice, love, everything, doctrine-centered. Now, what are the change brought about by Pope Francis in Catholic theology? Now, some people would say that his theology is radical theology. Why radical? Because at the center is not the doctrine, but love. Love. He tries to reinstate the centrality of love in Catholic theology. He's going back to the message of Jesus, message of love. So everything else comes from the center called love. Morality, liturgy, politics, action, relationship, service, justice, doctrines. Everything flows from this love. Love is at the center. It's a very beautiful way of graphically showing the different way of thinking brought about by Pope Francis. Okay, it's a very beautiful. I liked it very much when I saw. That's why I'm showing you. Okay, now it is 10 to 7. I suggest that we take a 5 minutes break and come back. Is it okay? Can we take a 5 minutes break and we come back? Our session is till 7:30. Is it okay?
Yes.
Yes, sure, sure.
Okay, yeah. So I guess we can continue the last part. Chat. Yes, I hope you can see my screen once again. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can see.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll just continue the last part now. A few more slides and we shall finish it. So in this section, we saw some of the descriptions by some famous theologians, very brief descriptions by Anselm, Karl Rahner, Lonergan, then Pope Francis, how he brings in this radical change into theology. He puts love at the center of all theology. Okay. So in this section, we saw three descriptions of theology: Anselm, Rahner, Lonergan. Then we saw the radical change Pope Francis brings into theology. Next section focuses on the question, how do we theologize meaningfully in today's world? Okay, how do we theologize meaningfully in today's world? There are no hard and fast rules about it. So I'll just share some thoughts about it, nothing in detail, but a few hints I will give. How do we do theology meaningfully in today's world? Okay, and I'm keeping in mind what the changes brought about by Pope Francis, also Bernard Lonergan, etc. Okay, yeah, it's against that background. Now I'm going to share with you a few thoughts about how to make our theology meaningful in today's world. Okay, so theologizing meaningfully in today's world. So we know that Jesus did not theologize as we understand it today, but he did theologize. The very foundation of Christian theology comes from the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. The very foundation of Christian theology. The main source is the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Okay. So Jesus is the key element in all of Christian theology. Now, there's a huge area in theology that's called Christology. I didn't show you, I hope somebody will show you that, when we talk about theology, there are various branches of theology. Okay. Scripture is a different discipline. Theology is a different discipline. Within theology, there are different areas are there, like a Christology, systematic theology. Within the Christology will come ecclesiology and all that. And then morality, Christian moral theology, then historical theology, pastoral theology. These are broad areas in theology. Okay. So Jesus is a key element in all of Christian theology. Now, there are two elements when we look at the life of Jesus, his mission. First is thinking about the world. Second, acting in the world. There are many elements in his mission, but for me, these two elements are very, very crucial and important. What are these two elements? Thinking about the world. Second, acting in the world, in the mission of Jesus. So we can learn a lot from Jesus, how to think about God, fellow human beings, and the world around us. Second, it is not just thinking about these things, but also acting in the world as Jesus did. So this becomes a kind of backdrop against which, I'll be sharing with you how to make theology meaningful in today's world. Thinking about the world, acting in the world. Okay. So Jesus' teaching and preaching reveals his theological vision. Jesus has a theological vision. How does it come through in the New Testament? Through his teaching and preaching and acting. Many elements in this theological vision are explicit and other elements are implicit. Certain things he speak explicitly, other elements are implicit. So what are some of the significant elements in the theology of Jesus? So how does Jesus theologize, so to say? He didn't theologize as we understand today. I said that already. But he has a theology. He has a way of going about speaking about about faith and etc. So we know the following elements: how to make theology relevant, meaningful. I'm going back always to Jesus. Okay. So first element is meaningful theology connects divine and human realities. This is very, very important in the theology of, in the thinking vision, theological vision of Jesus. So what is this element? Meaningful theology connects divine and human realities. Jesus' theology has God, whom he called Father, at its center. It's an endearing term, Abba, Father. So Jesus called God his Father, endearing term, Abba. So in Jesus's theological vision, faith vision, God is at the center. God is at the center. However, often his teaching places human beings alongside with God. Okay, he brings both the God reality, divine reality, and human reality together, places alongside. For example, Jesus spoke about the need to bring together the love of God and love of neighbor. One Pharisee would ask a question, what is the greatest commandment and all that? So he will bring love of God, you have heard in the Old Testament, love of neighbor. He'll bring together both these ideas together. So in effect, what Jesus says is this: on the one hand, we cannot talk about God without at the same time talking about human beings. On the other hand, we cannot talk about human beings without at the same time talking about God. Both realities are two sides of the same coin. This is a very, very important thing. He connects divine reality with human reality. This is a very, very important element in the theological vision of Jesus, and it has important implications, okay, for theology. So you cannot just say that, I believe only in God. I believe in God. I love God. But, I don't care about what is happening in society, what is happening to people. It doesn't bother me. You cannot say that if you have this understanding. That's implication. I hope you got what I'm saying. So both come together. Okay. Implication is that we have to be concerned about human reality. Only worshiping God, that is not sufficient. That's the meaning. Okay. Second, meaningful theology needs to be present to the world. This is very, very important, extremely important. I will explain what do I mean by this. So meaningful theology needs to be present to the world. One thing we note about Jesus is that he was present to the world around him, connected to the first thing what we saw. So what is the meaning of being present to the world? What does this mean? Jesus engaged with the world around him. He felt a sense of responsibility to respond to what is happening around him. That's the meaning. Being present to the world means this: he felt a sense of responsibility to respond to what is happening around him. This is an important element in a meaningful theology, being present to the world, paying attention to what is happening around us in human society, to our neighbor. See, if you don't have this dimension, if you don't take care of this dimension of being present to the world, the danger is that we will end up simply talking abstract ideas which has no relation to the world. That's why I showed you that Pope Francis, doctrines. At the center was the doctrine. Pope Francis says, no, love should be at the center. That is the vision of Jesus, actually. Pope Francis is going back to the vision of Jesus. Love is at the center. Okay? So if we don't have this connection with the world, there will be a disconnect between our theology and the world, Christian faith. There's a disconnect. That's why, people will talk all kinds of things which has no connection to the world, the Christian faith, abstract ideas, obscure ideas, which means nothing. So Jesus' theologizing begins from his engagement, being present to the world around him. Then it makes sense. Otherwise, if you start from the ideas, then it makes no sense to people. Okay, all right. So Jesus's theological vision is deeply embedded in his world. It's rooted in his world, in the world. He withdraws into solitude for prayer, definitely. He withdraws, but his ministry was engaging with the world around. Jesus responded to people and their life world. He responded to the concerns and problems of people around him. Okay, so there's a deep connection between the world around him and what he said and did. His mission is deeply connected to what is happening around him. Okay, so that's a meaningful theology needs to be present to the world. Being present to the world means, like Jesus, are we able to respond to our theology? Is it responding? Is it connected to the world? Or is there a kind of disconnect between theology and the world? When that disconnect happens, then all kinds of abstract ideas begin to enter into our theology, which makes theology meaningless, actually. Meaningless. Okay? Yeah. The third one is that meaningful theology needs to be embedded in human experience. Again, a related idea to the previous two ideas. A meaningful theology needs to be embedded, rooted in human experience. Note that Jesus did not start his thinking from some abstract ideas about God and human being. God is like this, God is like that. No. He did not start his thinking from abstract ideas, speculative ideas about God. No. And about human beings. Jesus focused on concrete experiences, his own experience and that of others. Jesus theologized from these concrete experiences. That's another important element. So it needs to be rooted in human experience. Otherwise, again, there's a danger of our theology sliding into abstract ideas and meaningless ideas. In doing theology, experience needs to be understood in a wider sense. This experience of political, historical, and social events taking place in the common world around us. It's a common world that's shared by us. It's a shared world, common world. These experiences, it could be political, historical, social events taking place in our common world. These experiences provide us the basis for any serious theological thinking process. These experiences. Always we don't succeed in doing it, but this can be a very meaningful starting point for our theology experience, okay? Human experience. The next one, fourth one, meaningful theology helps people to think, and reflect. Meaningful theology helps people to reflect, think and reflect. What does it mean? Jesus helped people to reflect about their thinking and actions. He asked people to think and rethink about received religious ideas. He asked people to think about pre-existing ideas in Judaism. This is an important part of Jesus' ministry. See, this particular aspect is not given sufficient importance in theology, Christian theology. Jesus is doing something very, very important. He is asking people to think. He's asking people to think through things. He's asking people to think what they are doing, what they are believing. There are so many examples of this in the New Testament. For example, the meaning of Sabbath. Sabbath observance was so central, Sabbath. It was so central in Judaism. But it had been reduced to a kind of observance of a few regulations and a huge amount of rules and regulations, and human beings are forgotten. So Jesus is asking them, what is the meaning of Sabbath? Have you thought about it? Sabbath is not made, man is not made for Sabbath. But Sabbath is made for man. Now, to talk like this 2000 years ago, that was a radical kind of thing. He's asking people to rethink their received ideas about the religious ideas in Judaism. Another famous thing where he asks people to think, helps people to think, is the famous incident in John's Gospel. It's one of the best brief narrative in John. A crowd brings a woman caught in adultery. And we are told that Jesus, he is sitting there and drawing something on the ground. He doesn't even look at them. And they wanted to test him, we are told. And when, Jesus, when they insisted, what do you think? Our law says that she should be stoned to death. He doesn't say, when they insisted, he straightens up, he looks at them and says, just one sentence. Let the one among you without sin, let him cast the first stone at her. Just one sentence. You know the effect that one sentence had on people. He told people to think what they are doing. And the effect of that one sentence was so huge that we are told that the crowd left one by one, beginning with the elders. They didn't kill her. See, just one sentence. He told people to think about what they are doing and what they are thinking about this woman. Okay? So this is it's an extremely important thing to think through things, or think through what we are doing. To think through what we are doing. This is an extremely important scope of theology. I'm not saying that we have to bring revolutionary ideas and change everything and things like that. It's not that people will not accept immediate changes and things like that. That's one of the reasons why they killed Jesus also. Many of the things what Jesus said, religious authority, Jewish authorities could not digest, they could not accept. Okay, so but unless there is some sort of change in the thinking of people, changes are very difficult in society, especially our attitude towards women, for example. The huge need for changes there. So Jesus is doing that. Okay, so this was an important part of Jesus' ministry. He's asking people to think through things. Is it meaningful what you are doing and what you are believing? The next one, with this probably I'll stop. Meaningful theology objectively looks at its own traditions. Jesus was rooted in the Jewish religious tradition, but he was able to have a critical distance from his own tradition. He realized that many of the Jewish religious beliefs and practices need to be reinterpreted. So he is able to create a distance between himself and Jewish tradition. See, this is an important thing which Jesus does. Only then, only when you have that distance, only you can look at your own tradition, whether it's a theological tradition or religious tradition, you can look a little objectively at your own tradition. Okay? Without that distance, we will not be able to understand our tradition. We have to create a critical distance like Jesus did. It's like, when we are so much emotionally involved in a tradition, we will not be able to make that critical distance. Okay? Many people are so much involved in religion, means everything. Oh my God, you cannot criticize religion. So then they become violent. They become violent if they are not able to make that distance. Okay? So we should be able to make that distance from traditions, So it's like looking at a statue. I would like to say, that's a good example. Let's say there's a big statue. If you go too close to the statue, you will not be able to see the statue properly. The same way, if you go too far away from the statue, let's say half a kilometer, you will not be able to see the statue. There's a kind of distance, right distance from where you can look at the statue and look at it, beautiful statue. In the same way, traditions. If you are too much enmeshed with tradition, then you cannot see your own tradition properly. That's what Jesus makes that critical distance. Okay, so he realized that Jewish religious beliefs and practices need to be reinterpreted. Jesus was interested in making Jewish religion relevant. That's why he made that distance. So he was interested in making his religion responsive to people and their needs. That's what Pope Francis is doing today. Okay, and some sections in Catholicism do not like what Pope Francis is saying and doing. I hope most of you are aware of it, especially in America. Okay, there's a large section of conservative bishops and lay people. They don't like Pope Francis at all. Okay, for the same reason why Jews did not like Jesus, Jewish religious authorities. Okay. So the last one, a theological imagination requires thinking differently. Thinking differently. So if you look closely, there's an important aspect of Jesus that comes through the New Testament narrative. Jesus is an enormously creative person. The New Testament, we see that Jesus taught with authority, and he was not like other scribes. Matthew 7:29. People were amazed at his teaching. Mark 1:22. So he has a huge, authority. People perceive that difference because Jesus taught differently. He acted differently. He taught differently. He preached differently. He was enormously creative. Okay, so this thinking differently is very, very important in theological imagination. It is not thinking differently for the sake of thinking differently. No. Because we have to think through things. When we stay with the issues sufficiently for a long time, there'll be new insights. That's the meaning of thinking differently. Jesus thought differently from the people, than the people surrounded him. He's an immensely creative person. Okay, that thinking differently is required. That's what Pope Francis is doing. He's thinking differently. It's not easy for him to do that, but he is doing it. So theological imagination is the ability to move away from conventional explanations about society, people, and values. So there's a conventional explanation. Conventional explanation means traditional explanations. About what? About God, society, people, and values. So theological imagination is our ability to move away from many of these handed down explanation, traditional explanation, conventional explanation. It is also the ability to see hidden factors involved in our situations. Okay. That's the meaning of theological imagination, thinking differently. What Jesus did, what Pope Francis is doing, that is something that we can do in our theological imagination. So to conclude, in this session, we saw how theology developed historically. Secondly, how Anselm, Rana, and Lonergan described theology and Pope Francis's idea of theology. And lastly, some significant elements in the meaningful theology. Theological imagination is a quality of mind. What is theological imagination? To conclude, it is a quality of our mind. Theological imagination helps us to see our social world, cultural world, and political world in a new and unconventional way. I end with a few questions for reflection. How did Christian theology develop historically? Second, how do Anselm, Rana, and Lonergan describe theology? We can also add how Pope Francis brings radical changes into Catholic theology. The third question, what could be some of the elements that can make our theology meaningful? Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Sabi, for a wonderful presentation. It was indeed very, very, very informative. Now we have around 10 minutes and we will utilize this time for clarification, for some doubts, for queries that you have. We already have one question in our chat box by Raina. I will read that question to you. You speak of theology as being an interpretation according to context. How contextual is theology in India? Doesn't it have a predominantly Western perspective? It apparently is dissociated from the pluralistic context in which it is practiced.
Yeah. First thing I want to say about that question is an absolutely important question, extremely important question, and the way it is formulated is absolutely wonderful. Very important question it is. So you speak of theology being interpretation about the context. How contextual is theology in India? Okay, so there have been many attempts to make theology contextual in India. Okay, it's predominantly a Western idea theology. Absolutely correct. Okay, that's why Jesuits like Di Nobili and Matteo Ricci and all, they tried. In some measure, they succeeded very in a limited sort of way, but they did not succeed. Beyond that. Okay, it's a constant challenge how to make theology what you call contextual in India. That's why Bernard Lonergan's understanding is very, very important. He said that theology is a help to make Christianity, Jesus' message, meaningful in a particular culture. That's a challenge before us. Does it happen? I'm not very sure about that. That's a challenge, all of us, before all of us. Okay, it doesn't, changes don't occur all of a sudden. Okay, I usually tell, when I teach, I know how difficult it is for me to change my attitude, personal attitudes, many of them. Now you can think of thousands and thousands of people, how to change their attitude. It's very difficult, when we think of changing how people think and interpret the world. It's very difficult, Many of the things what we say, people don't see the point. You just take Christian communities from Gujarat, go down to Vasai, go to Bombay, go down to Goa, go down to Mangalore, then to Kerala, and turn to Tamil Nadu and other Karnataka and other places in the tribal churches. Do you think that many of these ideas, people will have much resonance? I don't think. People have their own ideas about Christianity, and we have to respect that. We have to respect that. They have, some certain ideas about Christianity, about Jesus Christ, about God. Okay, it's fine. To the extent possible, we try to communicate what we think is meaningful. That's all we can do. There was one, Second Vatican Council. It has brought out certain changes, definitely, but it's also limited. It's also limited. So we have to understand how changes take place. Okay, we cannot rush through things. We cannot force changes. So in the situation where we are placed, what can I do meaningfully? That would be my response to your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Sabi. Anybody else who would like to comment or ask any question, any clarification?
There's some in that chat box.
They have appreciated you for your challenging session, interesting session, beautiful session.
Thank you. Thank
Some
you.
comments are there.
Yeah.
Raina has asked one more question. Would you be prepared to lead a group of faithful in doing contextual theology?
Well, see, this has to be negotiated. I'm already nearing my retirement. Yeah.
There is still time. There is still time.
Well, we can think about it. How can we go about it? And that's a very beautiful request from you. Give me some time to think about it. Probably leaners, they are the new generation of theology professors. They will be able to help you. I'm an old man. My thinking is old and things like that. Okay, but your question, Reina, is very request is very beautiful. We'll think about it. Okay, we can keep in contact or whatever that is. Okay.
The Savvy, there is no retirement when we work for the kingdom of God.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Raina has said that she will pray for Spirit's intervention. Yeah, she wants you. Yeah. Anybody else who would like to comment on the session or any question?
Hi, Linus. Stephen.
Hi, Father Stephen. Yes, please.
Thank you, Sebastian, for the wonderful talk.
Okay.
Very challenging and creative ideas. And in passing, you mentioned that Pope Francis also trying for his best to do that. But of course, we hear a lot of opposition.
Yeah.
For his, how do you think that he will address, or what will be the future of his creative ideas? Do you have any reflection on that? Thank you.
Is it Stephen Jayard?
Yes.
Stephen.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Good to hear from you, Stephen. Good to hear. Yeah. So your question again, we really, because you see, I would like to think in this way. Your question is very, very important. There's a huge section in America who are really reacting very strongly, including some bishops. It is in the Lacroix or some of these journals. I saw that thing very strongly. And in America, there's a very strong, a section of Catholics, very conservative Catholics, who doesn't want President Biden to have communion. All kinds of things are going on. Now, coming to your question, see, Pope Francis is dealing with an extremely complex world situation. And people's thinking is so different. There are all kinds of demands on the leadership of the church. So we have to keep in mind the complexity of the universal church. In that situation, it is not at all easy. I think that it is not at all easy for Pope Francis. He is doing a very difficult balancing act, a tightrope walk, because he has to balance so many things. So there's no easy way to bring in a solution. How would things evolve? We do not know. Because here, there are world situation of Catholicism is 1 billion plus people. So all kinds of thinking you will find, in African, the situation is different. In Asia, the situation is different. Europe is different. South America, North America, Australia, all these situations are so different. So it's very difficult to have a kind of clear-cut answer to your question because of the complexity of the Christian world, the Catholic world. That much only I can say. Yeah.
Thank you, Father. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We have 2 minutes more. If any quick comment, small, short question. Okay, since we have just 1 minute left, I will do the next job that I'm supposed to. So, Father Sabi, thank you very much for giving us your time and sharing your thoughts with us on the topic, theological imagination. And I'm sure people present here and the people who are watching on YouTube would agree with me that the session was indeed very rich and very informative. You explained to us what is theology and how did Christian theology develop historically. Then you explained to us how the church was grown after Jesus' death, resurrection, and his ascension. Then how the New Testament books helped the faithful to grow in faith. Then you also explained to us how theology took its shape in patristic period. Then you also spoke to us on how you explained to us how Protestant theology and Catholic theology is different. You gave some of the earliest definitions of theology from St. Anselm, Rana, and Bernard. Then you explained to us radical changes brought by Pope Francis, explaining pastoral aspects of theology that revolves around love. Then you explained to us how we could meaningfully theologize today, keeping in mind theologizing involves both God and human beings, and we all have responsibility to respond to what is happening around. So, on behalf of our President Francis Bhai and the team members, we have our coordinator Father Stephen Jayad, Sister Patricia, Dinesh, who is looking after the team now, Father Paul, and all of us gathered here. I thank you, Father Sabi, for this wonderful session. God bless you. Just a reminder for all the participants. We know that the church is gearing up for the entire process of synod on synodality. So next Saturday, that's on 13th November, our session will be on journeying together, led by God's Spirit, understanding synodality. And the speaker of the day would be Father Francis Gonsalves, President. Father Francis is actively involved in the entire synodal process at national level, and he has a team working with him, and he has been speaking at different forums on synodality. So he would be explaining to us what synodality is and how this process is going to go. So requesting all of you to be in time. Also, please share the link with your friends and request them to join this important session. Thank you one and all for joining this session. I thank Father Shiju for taking care of live streaming of this session. Thank you. We end it with the glory be. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
So thank you very much, Linus, and all the organizers and participants. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Bless.
Thank you, fathers.
Thank you. Thank you.